What's going on? Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I know it is a holiday week. I'm sure that a lot of us are probably even on the sideline this week or trading light. But I will keep it pretty brief today. I don't think there's too much to necessarily say on the back end of what I pretty much mentioned yesterday, and kind of a little bit of a hindsight of what I was particularly kind of gearing towards, in which did I expect this much of a particular bounce in which we saw in this market today? Not necessarily, but a hell of a move that we experienced today, a hell of a gap up that we had. So, kind of just to pretty much illustrate some quick things, quick points that I wanted to pretty much base this on. Following up on our live from basically yesterday, to pretty much just recap things on how it kind of played out of what I was looking at. Well, we had a nice little 5 day, 4 or 5 day little landslide in which we had just straight blood on the streets since Powell, since last week, right? We were able to finally get a little bit of a sign of a bounce yesterday, right? Rather choppy, more so, but a little bit of a sign of a relief, particularly. And that's what actually set the table for a nice little relief rally that we ended up having today, as you see the follow through, the more meaningful type of reversal that we really want to see, right? But bigger picture is that we still have this trend line support that was obviously broken. So the uptrend is overall still broken from the daily standpoint here. But now as we start to get a little bit of a reversal and potentially as high as retesting that downtrend support as a resistance, close enough to that 400, 401 mark, depending how soon we get up there. But my bigger concern going into tomorrow, towards the end of the week here, is if and when we can get past this 390 half mark, is what I'm particularly looking at. That to me is going to be the bigger telling story if we see more bigger legs to this little reversal that we have, or do we get shut out at 390 half and then we go right back to more blood on the street? That's my major concern. So that's why you do see I have a little bit of a zone that I set up between 388 half to 390 half is what I'm looking at. So about a 2 point spread that I see in terms of spy in which we could hit that resistance and then ultimately go right back down and we see more blood as we have the past 4 or 5 days. All right. So 390 half, I think that's pretty much just the mental number that needs to be remembered. I think if we break above 390 half, we may end up being talking about that 400 of retesting that downtrend resistance before we get more further downside. All right. So that's pretty much looking at SPY. Two other points that I wanted to kind of illustrate. Netflix was definitely one that was on my radar in terms of these individual names. Netflix was one that I said, all right, we had a very key and pivotal level at this 280 half mark that we actually teetered as support to resistance the past 2 months here, 2 to 3 months. And we were able to basically get a nice little higher low put in on that little reversal that we had yesterday off of that 280 marquee 280 level. And I said to pretty much keep an eye on this median of this little ascending channel, and we were able to pretty much get close enough to 299, and that mental number was tapped at 300. I believe we topped at around 300.66. So being the fact that, all right, now going into tomorrow, we're basically rejecting the median of this ascending channel as we regressed off the high of the day. Do we see a follow through, and can we enter into this gap fill that dates back towards December 15th, right? Can we end up getting over that three? This is roughly 303 half is what you want to break over tomorrow, or more so going into also in the end of the week here. I want to say, right? Can we get over 303 half, and then we start to talk about a bigger picture going into this gap fill as we push towards 315? That's going to be the bigger question mark. Or is today's pretty much little top that we had today? Do we end up progressing off of that to not make a basically make a lower high off of today, and then we trade right back down, in which case your first PT will be down towards 291. All right. So that was a beautiful one in which the median pretty much told you of this little ascending channel action, told you exactly where this was potentially trading up to once you started to get some headwind and you were able to break over that 291 mark. All right. So that was a beautiful one. The other one that I actually want to see tomorrow, if we are green tomorrow, it kind of actually had a particularly more bigger day. But I did talk about Netflix being another one that actually had a marquee level at this 238 half level. That's basically teetered as support to resistance as well. We were able to basically put in a higher high than yesterday's price action. A little bit of a telling reversal that's taking place right now. So going into tomorrow, I want to see, are we able to break over 246? If we were end up rejecting 246, that would be my pretty much my pause to necessarily stay sideline or look to see if there's an attempted short at that 246 resistance. right? Otherwise, if we could break over 246, I believe that we could see this end up having a pretty nice day, and I would trade this up towards 248 half is what I would be targeting tomorrow. All right, so that's another one. I think the most glaring weakness that we had today is Tesla. It continues to pretty much show that relative weakness. I talked about the fact that yes, yesterday we had about a 12 point little drop that we had on Tesla, but I did preference basically by saying that don't expect that kind of repeat performance in terms of the range that it traded yesterday. When you get a Tesla trading double digits, that's a pretty wide range that you traded for the day. So the fact that it was pretty much relatively flat on the day, I think at one point it was up about $2 to $3 before going flat. I think it was relatively just tighter range that we traded, which is more consistent of how Tesla should trade basically. But nonetheless, I think going to the fact that if you see the descending channel, downtrend is pretty much well defined. Upside that I have, if we can put in basically a higher high off of today, so over 141.26, I would be targeting 145, and ultimately 146 and a quarter is the resistance that I'm watching. Flip side to that scenario is if we continue to pretty much bleed out, my target to the downside is going to be 132 is what I'm looking at for the next pivotal support level, which will be about another $5 move to the downside. All right. So that's another one to pretty much keep an eye on, see how that ends up propelling tomorrow. Apple, another one, and another one which is kind of key in terms of how Netflix is, right? Nice little descending channel action that you see I outlined. You got the nice little reverse off of the higher low from yesterday's price action. But what ended up happening off of the median, the dotted line in the middle of this descending channel? Well, we were able to pretty much attempt to break above it, but we ended up rejecting and regressing off of it to close under that upper band. So that to me does give you a bearish sign. So in order for me to end up looking to say, all right, if Apple's going to get followed through tomorrow back to the upside, I need to see this put in a higher high above this 136.81 and trade on the upper band of this channel that we have. And then we can start to talk about 141, right? Otherwise, flips case of that scenario, I'm going to look to pretty much see if this trades under 134 and you trade this down towards 132, in which I will be looking for the downside. All right. I believe though, looking at the chart in terms of Apple, looking at Netflix, the fact of how their medians traded, you attempted to break above the medians, then you rejected. That tells me a bearish sign in which this relief rally for those particular two names kind of gives me the idea that the landscape is not a healthy one in which we get a follow through to the upside. So maybe it's a little bit of a consolidation day tomorrow. That is a possibility. Maybe an inside day tomorrow is possible, especially how big of a monster day that we had today, trading a 5 point range on SPY. So that is entirely possible. But it's just something to keep in mind is that, okay, if I'm going to look to see if they trade on the upper band of that channel, I want to see if they can put in a higher high off of today's price action before I attempt to pretty much jump into a call and then get rejected off of that prior day high, which will be today. All right. So that kind of outlines, I think, the three-headed monsters for the market here. Boeing actually had itself quite a day. That was one hell of a breakout. And obviously, I know this is one name that it is relatively hard to trust this name. I totally understand that. We are going to be pretty much retesting this resistance like going into tomorrow morning. I would suspect that we try to trade up towards 198, which was prior resistance that we ended up breaking down off of. So watch to see if that 198 trades. If we trade above it, I will look to see if you get follow through. And then that $200 mental mark is going to be on watch, in which case I have us tapping 201 is what I'm going to be having for resistance here. All right. So that kind of outlines, I think, the bigger names, the bigger movers of what can potentially give you the bigger indication of what we're looking at for tomorrow, whether it be to the upside, the downside, or we actually just relatively just go sideways. All right. But I think that's pretty short and brief. I know it's a holiday week, so not much activity from a lot of traders. We're all pretty much gearing up for Christmas here, so pretty much get some rest in, spend some time with the family. You guys all have a great afternoon.